So I just finished my story for the week. This one is called Airplane Beers. And yeah, I'm pretty excited to talk about it a bit. I'm gonna just like read a short excerpt, tell you about kind of my creative process behind it and whatever inspired me, which is Hunter S. Thompson, the Rum Diary, which I read just almost a few days ago. I'm gonna read a little bit of that as well and just kind of talk about the parts I liked. Since I'm done with writing, this is what we do when we don't write. My name is Simon. Welcome. I got a little coffee here to get me going. I think that's why people kind of hang out and drink coffees, because like gets you kind of energized and gets you talking. So Airplane Beers. What is it about? Basically, when I was flying to Barcelona this week, I just like sat next to two guys who were pretty funny, and they both already had a beer in their hand, and we just like kind of started talking. I was really excited to listen to some music. I had like a couple albums I wanted to listen to, but then we basically just ended up talking the whole flight. It was super fun. And they later on then invited me to go with them on their trip kind of to the south of Spain. And I was like, you know what? Kind of what would it actually be like if I would go? And as we're going to see later also, then I needed kind of a like a thing to go wrong in the end. So kind of forced me to go back to Barcelona, because I didn't really want the story to just end on the road, but I like to have them always kind of a clean ending. So I kind of had to come up with a way to force the character to go kind of back to Barcelona. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna read a quick excerpt right now. This is right in the beginning, where the main character already kind of met the two guys and they're talking to each other, and they already finished their first beer and they're now kind of waiting for the stewardess to like bring over the drinks cart and whatever. Goes like this. You should order. Okay. Do you know what to say? Yeah, I got it. All right, they're almost here. I can already see the cart. When the stewardess stopped and looked at the two guys, they couldn't speak. Completely frozen, they stared at the stewardess. I jumped in. Dos cervezas, por favor. Grateful for my help, they opened the cans and cheered to me. Thanks, you saved us. What's your name, by the way? Simon. I'm Chris, and that's Thomas. Nice to meet you guys. Do you want a drink? I'm good for now, thanks. But when it was time for the second round, I couldn't say no anymore. We spent the whole flight talking and annoying the people in front of us. Sometimes something about the altitude made the alcohol hit even faster and stronger than usual. And when it was time to put the seatbelts back on, we were properly drunk. And then kind of the second part is when I'm in my room already in Barcelona, and I get a phone call where they pick me up to go on the trip together. It was hot in my tiny room, and I opened the window. But it only went out to the stairs and the elevator. Whenever someone came home, a horrible mechanical rattling sound came from the probably centuries-old elevator. It cracked and creaked, its motor aching under the weight. I fell into a light, often interrupted sleep. The mix of new experiences and drugs let me dream of foreign lands and magical landscapes. My phone rang. On the display it said, Chris Airplane Barcelona. I hesitated for a moment, then I picked up. Chris was yelling, hey man, where you at? We're waiting downstairs. This city is awesome. Let's go. I didn't even have time to think. Just told him to hold on a sec and put my clothes from last night on. I hadn't even opened my backpack yet. It was still standing on the desk, so I grabbed that, put on my shoes, took my new keys and headed for the door. While I was sliding down the stairs, I could hear Chris already honking. And then they kind of go on that journey where they're traveling from Barcelona all the way to Valencia. Then something bad happens, right? And the main character kind of turns around. So, as I already said, I kind of had this idea already in the airplane when I was there and talking to these guys. And was like kind of this yes and you hear from improvisation a lot, or it's like, this is working, how can I go further there? and I was thinking a bit about how I was gonna do the end, and then when I did figure it out, it was kind of tricky because there was a lot of space in between from just like meeting the guys in like the airplane and describing them a bit there, and then they needed to be kind of developed as characters in the end for it to work and have that kind of satisfying end. So I kind of built that up a bit, and then I added in between kind of a night in Barcelona to also give the contrast to the second night where kind of everything goes wrong. And then I wrote backwards from the end. So kind of like, okay, going back to Barcelona, then the event that happened that made the main character go back to Barcelona. And then I was really kind of stuck in the middle because it was that part where they already started traveling and like going in the car, and then they had already arrived in the city. So I really kind of struggled with the thing in the middle, and then ended up just describing a bit kind of the landscapes they're driving through and not really adding much dialogue. And I think this is kind of a part where the story could still be expanded on kind of exploring more these characters of Chris and Thomas, and what are these kind of guys that are from Berlin and they're just like haven't flown in an airplane for 5 years, and what do they do on their vacations, right? Is it just like them getting drunk the whole time, or are they also doing sightseeing and all these different things? And really what's kind of their underlying motivations, and how do they act when they have that release where nobody knows them on a vacation? And I think this is kind of an interesting part that could have been way more explored in the short story, but there wasn't really the time for it, right? Because I already wanted to have the end in there, so this could have been like a whole 3-part thing with the beginning, then like a whole thing where they're on a trip together, and then kind of the end, and also adding a bit more reflection on like the turning around in the end. That's kind of quick, I feel, in the short story. So that's kind of where I could have really expanded on. But on the other side, I think now they're just kind of so flat, the characters, that it's tricky to then cross that boundary and make them even more interesting. I did add like a lot of short dialogue in between. There is some observations, but it's trying to do kind of that balance of a little bit of dialogue here and there to keep the action going, short descriptions to get kind of that, get into the scenery, but really with that focus of having a fast plot, have like a lot of things happening, and didn't really want to focus too much on either describing Barcelona or just other things like the airport or things like that, which I felt like here wasn't really necessary. I was really trying to get that kind of fast action where a lot of stuff is happening. Yeah. All in all, I wrote the story pretty quickly. I think it was like half a week. I had one day where I wrote like a lot. I took a lot of breaks in between, but that day was like super productive, where I already had kind of the basic idea of the stories. I just needed to write most of the parts, and I usually did like 20 minutes, 30 minutes of writing, first at home with my laptop, and then kind of needing a break, I went out to a cafe, sat there for a while, and then wrote some more stuff on paper, went back home, had another writing session, and then actually in the evening I went to a jazz bar and was there a bit early, was waiting for my friends, and that's kind of where I finished the middle part then of the story. So that was something that was really new for me, of like having a lot of short writing sessions during the days, doing like one day. Usually what I do is like I write a little bit every day, and then I have like big breaks in between. So I did notice kind of it was getting more difficult, but I think what really helped me was that I lost my headphones actually on the way to the airport. And so whenever I was like walking around to the cafe or just like doing the dishes or whatever, right, I didn't have any music to listen to. And I think that's a really, really big thing that helps me right now, is to have like less input. And don't need to be like thinking about the story all the time, but just this kind of like subconscious thing where it's like thinking about the story in some ways, or just like random ideas coming in, like the guy sitting next to me at the cafe, or just like these kind of small things that are happening. I think that's really something that helped me a lot in this story, and something I want to keep up is just trying to consume less and just have like idle time, like in the metro or just walking through the city or stuff like that. So that's kind of really been helpful for me. Also with the last stories, just like try to not watch YouTube all the time, or like TV shows or whatever, but just actually be in that kind of uncomfortable boredom kind of state, from which then a lot of great ideas are coming. So that's been really, really helpful for me, and something I want to do a lot more. Just have these kind of, yeah, kind of input pauses. That's been for me kind of the greatest thing lately in writing that really got me more forward. The other thing I started doing, which kind of tricky to keep up, but I try to only read like before falling asleep and after waking up, instead of like scrolling Instagram or something, but not really doing that like all the time. But it did help me, and it does help a lot when you have something exciting to read, right? Especially if you have like a longer book, so then you can like keep reading and you're excited for the continuation. So I did do that with the book I'm going to talk about now, which is the Rum Diary by Hunter S. Thompson, which really was a huge inspiration also on the last two short stories I wrote, which is much more kind of action-packed and crazy things happening, but still rooted in realistic things, so not like fantasy or whatever. And that book has been like a huge contrast for me compared to the books I read before, which were mainly like old classics and just stuff I found at the library. But I did watch like an interview about him, and then I also remembered that I watched the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is like a film adaptation of one of his novels. And he wrote a bunch of like articles, short stories things. So I got one of those books, The Great Shark Hunt, I think it's called. And then I also got a novel, which is The Rum Diary, which actually he wrote like right in the beginning of his writing career, but didn't get published until way later. So The Rum Diary got published in 1998, but that was like way into his career already, where it was already famous. So I found it was interesting that you do find that kind of early writing of somebody that's like famous, and wasn't like bad or anything, right? It was actually a really, really good book. So then it's also kind of exciting to see like somebody's early work already have this kind of level. Yeah, so the book is basically about this guy who is a writer in the US, and he goes to Puerto Rico and works there for like this newspaper, this English newspaper, and obviously drinks a lot of rum. That's where the name comes from, the Rum Diary. And then he just like experiences a bunch of crazy stuff, like gets drunk with the other reporters, gets into fights with the police, gets arrested, and then goes to like a carnival, and there's like crazy stuff happening there as well, and taking a bunch of drugs and like these yacht parties, and really like a lot of crazy things happening, but all like realistic, right? It's not that you're thinking like, right, but it really sucks you in, and you just like, it's like one thing on another. There's a few stretches that are a bit slower, but those also explore really interesting ideas about, there's a pretty big chunk about if he should settle down in Puerto Rico or not. So he's kind of staying with a colleague in the beginning, and then he's thinking about like he could work more and then actually afford a nice place and get a car and everything. And that's also kind of an interesting part where he's like deciding if he should settle a bit more or keep living that kind of rogue traveler's life. So I selected one part here, which is pretty late into the book. I would say it's like right around the half point. And there's a few characters here. There's, I don't know really how to pronounce his name, Yamon, which is this interesting guy. He's like, I think he gets like fired right in the beginning from the newspaper. And then he also is kind of abusive towards his girlfriend, but the main character doesn't really do anything about it, which I found was kind of a weird part in the beginning. And here they are in this on this other island for their carnival, right? And his girlfriend, the girlfriend of Yemen, is Chanel, and they're both kind of the other main characters in the book and bits and pieces throughout. And yeah, here at this point they're just met at the carnival. They're sitting in some like hotel lobby thing, whatever. And I'm just gonna go right into it. So this is the Rum Diary by Hunter S. Thompson. Yaman came back with 3 glasses of ice, cursing because the bartender had charged him 30 cents for each one. He put them on the floor and filled them up with rum. He bought like some cheap rum bottles instead of getting the drinks at the hotel. These bastards, he mumbled. They'll get rich selling ice. Look how the rotten stuff melts. Chanel laughed and kicked him playfully in the back. Stop that silly complaining, she said. You'll spoil the fun. Balls, he replied. Chanel smiled and sipped her drink. If you'd let yourself go, you'd enjoy it. He finished pouring the drinks and stood up. Don't give me that crap, he said. I need a mob to enjoy myself. She didn't seem to hear him. It's too bad, she said. Fritz, which is a nickname for Yemen, just can't enjoy himself because he can't let go. She looked at me. Don't you agree? Leave me out of it, I said. I came here to drink. She giggled and held up her glass. That's right, she said. We came here to drink. Just have a good time and let's go. Yemen frowned and turned his back on us, leaning on the railing and staring down at the plaza. It was almost empty now, but far down the street we could hear the drums and the howl of the crowd. Chanel finished her drink and stood up. Come on, she said. I feel like dancing. Yemen shook his head wearily. I don't know if I can stand any more of it. She pulled at his arm. Come on, it'll do you good. You too, Paul. She reached out with her other hand and tugged at my shirt. Why not? I said. We might as well try it. Yemen straightened up and reached for the glasses. Wait a minute, he said. I can't face this without rum. I'll get some more ice. We waited for him at the top of the stairs that led down to the street. Shino turned to me with a big smile. We have to sleep at the beach, she said. Did Fritz tell you? No, I said, but I found out anyway. I know that comes highly recommended. And then they go dancing and having kind of this crazy night and do end up going to sleep at the beach because like during this carnival all the other hotel rooms and everything are booked out. And I thought this was kind of a cool excerpt because it shows this kind of in-between also of the action, which is still super fun, right? So there are these kind of action-packed parts where there's like so much coming on, like a fight with the police, for example. But there are also these parts in between where they're just talking about whatever they're gonna do next and drinking all the time. Of course, you can see there's like a bunch of time already rum mentioned here, which of course is a big part of the book. But I really also like these parts which show kind of the more natural and kind of in-between moments of traveling, and really also showing that it's not just all like one thing after the other and everything's crazy, but there's also these kind of moments where you're just like hanging out with your friends and talking about stuff. And yeah, what really I thought was so interesting about this book was the how do I say, like this rough and raw travel experience, which you don't really get much. I feel especially on like social media, there's a few of these like, oh, everything's super beautiful and whatever. There's these like stuff that can go super wrong and you're gonna get robbed, but there's few like things that are just about the normal parts of traveling they're still fun, like this part here, where it doesn't have to be always something like crazy and new, but you can also have these kind of moments for just like everyday things. And that's something I really liked. The whole rise and fall story of the newspaper is also cool, and kind of how he adapts to the island. Um, and then, of course, there's like some parts where he's like crazy on drugs, which is also so fun because these are all things that like I wouldn't really do, but they're like exciting to read about and kind of live through his eyes. And then there's also all these kind of failed just characters, like one of the reporters who is like a complete drunkard, and he's the guy that's like reporting about the crimes and police, and then he does end up helping them out for a bit. So yeah, there's all this kind of other characters, and one I also really like is kind of his best friend in the story, which is the photographer of the newspaper. And the whole time he's just like complaining about the island and how he doesn't want to be there anymore, but he's actually been the one that's there the longest, and also like working at the newspaper the longest, like a couple of years already, while most of these guys are just like there for like half a year or a year, and then they're leaving again. He's always talking about leaving. He's always complaining, but at the same time, he's just like there, right? Which I thought was also such a fun part. And you also notice sometimes, just like with your friends and other travelers, there's just people that love to complain, right? There's always this thing which I notice in the hostels, this kind of out competing of pain. It's like, what terrible conditions did you like go through already? Like the worst flights, the worst hostels, and like bed bugs and drunk nights where you almost got robbed, and like all these kind of stories that people just love to tell you, where they're like suffered a lot and they're just complaining about stuff. But then also you're like, well, you could have stayed at a different place, you know? But I feel like sometimes there's this part where travelers just like want to suffer and then also tell people about it afterwards, but they're not actually doing anything to suffer less. So I thought this was also a super fun character. And the whole time you're like, you just get out of here. What are you doing? Like, just leave. Because he also has a bit of money. Like, anyways, so I really, really enjoyed this book, The Rum Diary by Hunter S. Thompson. You can probably also find it at libraries. I got it at the library. Don't really have to buy it new. It's kind of famous. Another thing I wanted to talk about, they also did turn this into a movie where Johnny Depp is playing the main character. But this, honestly, I don't know if the movie works without having read the book, because I watched the movie like the day after I finished the book, and that was really fun because it was kind of like a best of the moments in the book, and it stays super, super true to the book. It just leaves a bunch of stuff out, of course. But I thought it was more interesting kind of as a comparison of the mediums, kind of how do you need to tell a story if it's a movie, and how do you need to tell if it's a book, because of course you don't have a lot of monologues or stuff like that in the movie. So I thought that was interesting, and also they had to kind of merge a few characters, which I thought was really fun to see. But I honestly don't know if the movie works without having read the book. I think just give it a try maybe if you want to watch that. But I do really recommend the book. I think it's definitely worth the read. The beginning's a bit slow, but I think it gets really into that mood of leaving and traveling, because it begins in New York, where is he actually leaving, and then the airplane and the first hotel room and everything, which I thought was really nice to kind of get into that traveling mood. So I did appreciate that kind of slow beginning. Yeah. So after having read that book, I really wanted to kind of emulate this exciting travel part, while most of the stories I've written before were much more kind of reflective on certain moods or social situations, but not dialogue heavy as much. and not so like action-packed, exciting, but if there was dialogue, it was more kind of two people sitting and talking. So I did kind of emulate that a bit in the last two stories. The first one being kind of that all-nighter, and now the one I just posted about the drunk aspect, right, of the drinking, and also how people can then just kind of go crazy, and how it also is a bit difficult to like say no, which I think worked out well in this story. I feel like if I would take more time, I could clean up a few parts, but as kind of the short story, it really works well. And I did achieve this kind of exciting action stuff, but at the same time, also these kind of relaxed moments in between, like the description of the room I'm staying in now. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about the short story. Have a read, let me know what you think. And for next time, I'm gonna see if I can find another short story. Right now I'm reading Spanish short stories because I'm in Spain right now, right? And I did already have a few that I liked, but nothing that I was like super excited about, like this book. But maybe I'll pick one of those for next time. Or if you have some short stories you can recommend me, or maybe even something you wrote, send over to me. I'm super excited to read also contemporary stuff, which I feel is a bit more tricky to find. Like most post-up substacks are just like, here, I just started writing, sending you stuff, blah, blah, blah. So I am still looking for kind of a good magazine or whatever for recent short stories. Send me your stuff if you're writing something. I'd love to read it. Super curious also always what people are thinking about kind of in the same time as we're in right now, because most of these things you're reading, there's like no smartphones and all these kind of things, right? So I'm super curious about that. Check out my short story, Airplane Beers, a spontaneous detour I could have avoided. You can read that either on my website, simonvanlaak.de, or also on Substack. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think. And yeah, thank you for watching what we do when we don't write. Have a good day. Bye bye.